Chapter 9, Death Leopard. The current Google factoid claims that there have been 109 billion humans who've lived upon planet Earth. And if I shrugged and went along with that data, you've just met 5 of my favorite choices for the many antichrists that have opposed God and then died. I had to speculate on all 5, but head number 6, instead of billions and billions of choices, I had a relatively low number to choose from. I had to find one who is. Easy, right? John knew the dude was alive at the time he received the apocalypse that became known as the Book of Revelation. Simple. Well, not even the date is an obvious fact. You see, there are many mindsets about the literal and figurative meaning of the Book of Revelation, even within Christianity. Denominations vary on how to see the only book in the Bible that earns a reader a blessing for reading it. Some believed it in a quick return of Christ. Peter and Paul preached like Jesus was coming back any day. For those first few decades, it was a frenzied sprint. Yet the qualifier used by Jesus was that the gospel must first be spread to all nations. That took much longer than Peter and Paul expected. The concept of Christ returning suddenly became muddy. Some believed in a long return. Back in the first century, Barnabas put out a theory that the Old Testament mattered because of all the Christ and end times prophecies within it. I agree. One of his points to the early Christians was that the days of creation had meaning. Barnabas reckoned that since a, quote, day is like 1,000 years to the Lord, that 6 days means approximately 6,000 years between Adam and the end times. I'm not claiming Earth age. Okay. In Barnabas's theory, the millennial kingdom of 1,000 years is the same as God having the 7th day as a Sabbath. It is the day of rest. It is a day of worship. At the end of the 7th day, Judgment Day. So the Barnabas theory is that it'd be another 2,000 years until we get to the Battle of Armageddon. What? That's now. Yes, some believe that all the happily ever after described with New Jerusalem means that we're already living in paradise since our souls have been saved and it's up to us to fix the world. With this take, the apostasy of the church is ignored and we're evolving into a better and better world. Some believed all the prophecies were simply previewing the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And so we're living in a vague millennial kingdom, I guess? Again, my autistic brain might not be as sharp as others, but if a few aspects don't work, it short circuits. This one does not compute for me. Like I said, it's easy to make claims, so even trying to get a fact like, when was the Book of Revelation written, can get you several answers. Burning the Nero theory. There are basically 2 camps. Camp A includes the preterists, who believe that all the prophecies in Revelation describe events that already took place. They're not fans of any of this speculation. So they believe that it described the destruction of Jerusalem, and thus, the villain had to be around 70 AD. To them, the only candidate was Nero. Because of this, the Nero theory has spilled into Camp B discussion. And Camp B folks are much more literal in their belief in the prophecy. So who's Nero? Nero is the 6th century emperor who ruled from 54 to 68 AD, which is getting pretty close to the year Jerusalem was destroyed. Nero is an entitled rich kid with mother issues. He was a bit effeminate and liked the Greek style compared to the warrior Roman style, and as a result, he forbade the killing of gladiators. He didn't even like capital punishment. He was a performer and singer who wanted to please and be popular. This guy was not terrifying compared to the other Caesars, other world leaders, or our other antichrists. So why would John be afraid to write this dude's name? To a preterist, Revelation is about current events. So the whole 666 or DCLXVI coded name, Mark of the Beast, insinuated that John was afraid to write the name of the world's greatest villain. Well, plus, Nero was dead 2 years before Jerusalem burned, and he had nothing to do with it. This whole theory makes my head hurt. Why would there be 7 churches in Asia when Christianity hasn't fled the Holy Land yet? Well, yes, Nero was a piece of garbage. He's famous for being an entitled diva. He wanted to build a new palace. Folks denied him, so he throws a tantrum. He fiddled while Rome burned in legend, when he had agents start a fire to burn down enough land for his building project. And then he blamed Christian terrorists for it. Well, this shell game ended up causing enough uproar that both Peter and Paul ended up taking the fall in Nero's land grab. Wicked deeds, but nothing on par with these other guys. When the political tides turned on this spoiled brat, he ended up killing himself when Romans turned on him. Rome broke into a civil war. A year later, we had new administrators. Yet for some reason, many folks are hung up on Nero. First of all, ask yourself what language John would have used to write Revelation. In writing to the Turks, did he use Hebrew, Greek, Roman, or Turkish, okay? Or what language did he read when he saw the name 666 on the forehead? That's another big problem. What numbering system did he see? Yet the preterists believe that John used gematria, a system used by Kabbalists who secretly encode the name of Nero. With this mindset, he took the Hebrew word for Nero. No, wait, that doesn't work. With this mindset, he took the Hebrew word for Neron Caesar, dropped a bunch of letters to turn it into NRONQSR, and then used the gematria system. Why? Oh, yeah, I know. And cranked out a numerical code 666. Or, hold on, is that DCLXVI in Roman numerals? You see my point. Even in isolation, this whole theory it makes my head hurt. But when you try to make all the other stuff fit the time period, it just doesn't. Is 95 is. I've already written Examining the Beloved Disciple, which gives an account of John's life, so I'll keep this section brief. Eusebius was a Christian historian with flaws who wrote an overview of the first 3 centuries of Christendom, including the early days. Tradition is that John lived in Ephesus prior to Patmos and also afterwards. One of the traditions has him bringing the Virgin Mary with him to Ephesus. In his book, Eusebius quotes and cites his way through the years after Christ, which is where many of our traditional knowledge of this time period comes from. He tells us that Peter was crucified, how Paul was executed, and several other important deaths. Lots of history. Eusebius confirms that John was a prisoner of Domitian while at Patmos until Nerva succeeded him to the throne. How does Eusebius know it was Domitian? Historians. Here's a summary of why I trust the 95 AD date, other than just logic. Tertullian, in his Apology, speaks of Domitian as having banished some Christians and afterwards giving them leave to return home. probably intending St. John and some others. Origen, explaining something in Matthew, says James, the brother of John, was killed with a sword by Herod, and a Roman emperor, as tradition teaches, banished John into the island of Patmos for the testimony which he bore to the word of truth. Victorinus, bishop of Ptah, around 290, again and again says that John was banished by Domitian, and in his reign saw the revelation. Jerome, in his Book of Illustrious Men, says, Domitian, in his 14th year of his reign, raising the second persecution after Nero, John was banished into the island of Patmos, where he wrote the Revelation. Sulpicius Severus, not to be confused with Severus Snape, says that John the Apostle and Evangelist was banished by Domitian into the island Patmos, where he had visions, and where he wrote the book of Revelation. Keeps going. Isidore of Seville, near the end of the 6th century, says, Domitian raised a persecution against the Christians. In this time, the Apostle John, having been banished into the island of Patmos, saw the book of Revelation. So like Eusebius, it wasn't a controversial take to bring up the name Domitian. Except for the preterists, most biblical scholars feel pretty confident in putting down the date of 95 AD. The boiling oil incident. In the spirit of getting off point, I'm going to talk about a famous tale involving both John and Domitian. Eusebius also puts this story into his big research paper. In the account, Domitian is doing his best to wipe out Christianity by targeting leaders and anyone with royal blood. Apparently, his bounty hunters were effective and brought him all sorts of victims who would be tortured in public spectacles for Domitian's approval. Remember, Nero banned this sort of stuff. One day, they brought Domitian a big fish. Well, actually, an old fish. They found this guy in Ephesus, and from his age, they believed he might have been a first-generation Christian and a high-ranking member of this terrorist group. Since this was a special occasion for Emperor Domitian, he wanted it done right. So he had a big vat of oil brought in so that they could boil this fella alive. Domitian and friends gathered, the prisoner was brought in, and the signal was given. But when this old geezer was lowered into the vat of oil, nothing happened. Apparently, when Jesus says, "If I will that he tarry till I come again, what is that to thee?" It's how rumors of immortality get started. Check out John 21:22. Well, the oil obeyed Jesus and refused to harm John, which is about when evil Domitian began to realize that the old man in front of him once said, "Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them?" And that's from Luke 9:54. That guy was getting annoyed in lukewarm oil. Freaked out, Domitian changes his plans. He's suddenly afraid of this guy, and being an inversed believer in God, God is the bad guy to him, he believes John could destroy him and all of Rome. So if you can't kill him, Domitian sends him to a remote island. Clever idea. Why? You see, Patmos is not a penal colony filled with thousands of hardened criminals. Domitian likely knows how heroes of the faith can evangelize. So John is sent to one of the Mediterranean's most remote and barren islands. Putting him there means he can't evangelize anybody. Even if the rumors of immortality are true, this old guy can't just twiddle his thumbs for another 2,000 years. When Domitian dies in 95 AD, John is released from his island prison. As Eusebius writes, at that time, too, the Apostle John, after his exile on the island, resumed his residence at Ephesus, as the early Christian tradition records. So that's why I'm sticking with is equals 95 AD. A leopard can't change his spots. Unfortunately, there is hardly any biblical ammunition for analyzing Domitian. Antiochus and Alexander got entire chapters of Daniel. Ramses the Great fills the opening pages of Exodus. Even Lamech gets a paragraph of text. But Domitian? Everything we know about him is from the historical records. And considering how much his predecessors hated him, I'm not sure they paid the biographers very much. Yet, if you do go back to Daniel, he included his dream of the 4 beasts, who in my estimation were the remaining 4 kings to come. The lion, Alexander the Great. The bear, Antiochus Epiphanes. The next one, well, this is what it says in Daniel 6, verse 7. After this I beheld, and lo, another, like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast also has 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. That's all, folks. It's not super obvious, and folks could twist and turn the meaning to fit anybody. Like this: Domitian has 8 letters, and dominion has 8 letters, and 6 of the 8 letters match. Sorry, I'm still teasing the Nero camp. Is there symbolism with a leopard? Sure. They ate people in nature. So leopards are obviously a symbol for power and strength, Despite just being a big cat, they're also symbolically brave and bold, full of confidence. Oh, and they also represent a kind of shape-shifting, which is gnarly. There are several leopard lines in the Old Testament, but they all seem to be literal big cats. Yet I'd like to remind you about our visual clues about the Antichrist. So this is how Revelation 13:2 describes it. And the beast, which I saw, was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him, the beast, his power, and his seat, and great authority. Stuff like this is why I put so much stock in Daniel's prophecies. Lion, bear, leopard, oh my. A history of violence. The biggest problem I had with researching Domitian is that there was a ton of information on him. So much information, in fact, that when I gleaned information, it became shockingly easy to build a supervillain. So I'll admit that cherry-picking factoids about Domitian isn't a super strong argument, especially since I began with generic history. Remember, I'm not trying to hit right for the history books in an unbiased method. I'm biased. This dude frightens me. Domitian was born in 51 AD during the reign of Claudius. He was 3 when Nero became emperor, 13 when Rome burned, and a tender youth of 17 when Nero took his own life. Unlike Nero, he didn't grow up believing he'd rule. His father, Vespasian, was a general known for his invasion of Britain in 43 AD and served Nero out in the empire. Domitian has an older brother, born in 39 AD, who also became a famous general while serving in Germania. They were an ambitious family trying to play the political game. From what I can tell, Vespasian and Titus, the brother, were away while Domitian and his mother stayed in Rome. Then the pieces of the chessboard began to move. Nero is often described as effeminate. Domitian is later often described as homophobic. So about the time Domitian is hitting maturity, war breaks out in Judea in 66 AD. Domitian's dad and brother both get fired and then reassigned to the hot mess in Judea. It's like they were getting punished for something. Plus, this was Nero's way of keeping them away from Rome. Something's fishy. Things in Judea were strange. After surrounding Jerusalem, the Roman commander withdrew and got massacred shortly after. So in 67 AD, Vespasian and the brother Titus showed up with 60,000 soldiers to deal with the emboldened Jews. As Dad was systematically taming Judea, things got crazy in Rome. It seems someone was stoking unrest against Nero. So Nero kills himself in 68 AD. It became the year of the 4 emperors. Gabla, that's his name, sorry. Gabla took Caesarship, if that's a thing, from Spain. Count him as emperor number 1. While a mysterious someone stoked internal revolt in Rome, Vitellius, the emperor number 3, stokes external revolt. Back in Judea, Vespasian throws his hat in with the rebels and prepares to return, leaving Titus in charge of Judea. Got it so far? Another guy named Otho, who is emperor number 2, Otho gets in the game, bribes the Praetorian Guard to kill Galba, and then kills himself when he loses a battle to Vitellius. That was quick. So here comes Vitellius, emperor number 3, to march on Rome, where Domitian lives, who tries to get Vitellius to abdicate. Bold proposal, huh? Even though Vitellius tries to kill young Domitian, I wonder why, it fails. Domitian has an ally, apparently, Primus. Thanks to his dad and brother, the military is fully rebelling, and Primus leads the Danubian legions to retake Rome. Primus ends up killing Vitellius. And then something very, very strange happens. Primus names Domitian the emperor at 18. LOL, says another general named Mucianus, who quickly explains to Primus that the military coup is supposed to support the dad, not the youngest son. Never mind. And Vespasian becomes emperor number 4. So Dad needs to die. Vespasian ends the Julio-Claudio dynasty as the help ends up ruling the empire, just like Horemheb ended the Egyptian dynasty. Oh, hey, that's a trait. There's probably a good reason why paranoid Nero sent him to Judea in 67, since he ends up on the throne less than 2 years after this insult. From there, Vespasian rules Rome for the next decade and brings stability to the empire. It's all a bit boring, unless you're Jewish. Oh, yes, there was a major conflict still happening in Jerusalem, and once the civil war ends in Rome, Vespasian unleashes Titus to annihilate the Jews, which he does. According to historian Josephus, it's about as bad as it gets. Seriously, it's a disgusting, disturbing event that leaves the temple in rubble. The priestly daily sacrifice was certainly ended. Yet Vespasian isn't done yet. He begins a genocidal policy by hunting down any Jew from the royal line of David. With the Jewish thorn removed from his side, he celebrates and promotes Titus with the Ark of Titus. And Domitian? Nothing. Dad purposely prevents Domitian from attaining any position of power during those 10 years. So about the time Domitian is 28, his dad suddenly comes down with a case of deadly diarrhea and dies, which historians believe was poison. Titus only sits on the throne for 2 years. Like his father and other emperors, Titus declares himself to be a god, so that's nothing special with these guys. Although a fair ruler, he had some very bad luck. For example, Mount Vesuvius blew up and had barely gotten himself comfortable when he also died from poisoning. This time, folks realized it might be more than just unlucky diarrhea. The historian Philostratus even had a suspect and method. Domitian, with a sea hare, in the farmhouse. Solving the game of Clue didn't really matter. Domitian had become emperor. 12 years after having had the crown taken away, Domitian becomes emperor of Rome and rules for 15 years. And by many accounts, was considered to be one of Rome's greatest and most efficient administrators ever. Yes, indeed. He overhauled the military and helped it achieve its peak efficiency. Not bad for being Antichrist head number 5. Oh, that's right. John said somebody alive was the 5th head of the Antichrist. The dark deeds of Domitian. This guy freaked out the Romans. Despite not being in the military, he strutted around in a general's uniform and displayed an unhealthy interest in warfare. He also implemented horrifying penalties for crimes that went far beyond law and order. His homophobia took barbaric turns when he mercilessly killed his lead general Saturninus, displayed his head as a trophy, and then tried to erase him from history. Nero PTSD? Being a bad guy does not qualify you as one of the greatest villains in history. Is there more? Yes. Domitian also declares himself as a deity, but what Roman didn't? Yes, he upgrades it so that he is the sole deity to be worshipped, but hey, that's a big ego. Yet it is private actions that were so intriguing. Apparently, he brought back some of Rome's ancient religions. Roman mythology had been whitewashed during the Alexander era, and thus it's hard to distinguish where Greek mythology ends and Roman mythology begins. So Domitian dedicates his power to uncovering the ancient rites. Sound familiar? Just like Ramses the Great disregarded traditional Egyptian mythology to worship a death god, Seth, and a virgin warrior goddess, Aneth, Domitian picks up and worships yes, that's right, a 4-headed Minerva. Who's Minerva? Heck, even 10-year-old Jason Willis knows that one. Minerva is the Roman name for Athena, a virgin warrior goddess. Since Minerva normally doesn't have 4 heads, it's unclear what the heck Domitian is worshipping here. The goddess of witchcraft, Hecate, see Macbeth if you don't know that one, Hecate is a 3-headed goddess. Does that count? Perhaps. I mean, Hecate is pretty old. The 4 faces of Minerva. Here's my theory. Semiramis in the Nimrod story, Aneth in the Ramses story, Athena in the Alexander story, and Minerva in the Antiochus story. The virgin warrior goddess theme seems to be a common thread. And considering Semiramis crowned herself as the Queen of Heaven, it wouldn't shock me if Domitian's quest to uncover the past led him to his sons of perdition conclusion. One of the historians I read described how Domitian would invite powerful Romans to his private dinner parties, and they'd be so black and funereal, I think there should be an adjective, that his guests would be paralyzed with fear. How's that for dark? But don't forget that there is limited biblical text about this beast. But what else did the leopard have in its description? Let's look again. Daniel 7 verse 6 says, "After this I beheld, and lo, like a leopard, which upon its back of it had 4 wings of a fowl, the beast also had 4 heads, and dominion," or Domitian, "was given to it." Yep, there's 4 heads. Still not sure what this means, but it's enough for me. Aside from all the creepy stuff, he continues the policy of hunting down the royal bloodline. Why would you do that? Think about it. Judea has been ruled by non-Jews for centuries now. They're not hunting down Herod's Idumean bloodline. They're hunting down the Davidic line. Why would a Roman care? Domitian is not an atheist. Like Nimrod and Antiochus Epiphanes, he likely believes in a creator, but sees God as his enemy. Killing God's favorite people is the closest he can get to God. Eusebius brings up an anecdote about how his bounty hunters brought him 2 grandsons of Jude. Who? Well, the bounty hunters had to explain that Joseph and Clopas were brothers, and according to Jewish tradition, when one brother dies, the children, yada yada yada, brothers of Jesus. Except instead of Jude, they bring him the grandchildren of Jude. In the only merciful moments involving Domitian, he is disgusted by these gruff, calloused men and felt they were too pathetic to be worthy of kingship, and refused to follow through with the planned execution. He didn't pay up. The 2 grandsons outlived Domitian and became early church leaders. Near the end of his rule, John is brought to him, and, oil anecdote here, John ends up exiled on Patmos. Meanwhile, in Rome, Domitian's reign of terror continued to the bitter end. According to the historian Suetonius, Domitian's dark magic gave him a pretty good clue about how he was going to die, including, get this, the time of day. So Domitian safeguarded himself at the day and hour approached. But his servants tricked him by lying to him about the time. And when he relaxed his guard, a servant named Stephanus stabbed him in the groin while claiming to have information on the assassination plot. That's funny, in a dark sort of way. In true Domitian fashion, however, he murders his own assassin before succumbing to his wounds. Rome hated this guy so much that there were no grand send-offs or funerals. Without any children, the senators picked a new emperor. Upon taking the throne, Emperor Nerva passed a decree, Damnatio Memoriae, that required all memories of Domitian to be erased from history. Coins and statues were melted, his arches were torn down, and his name was erased from all public records. And John went home to Ephesus and started writing letters to the Christian churches in Asia. Ding dong, Domitian's dead. But the scariest king was still to come.